Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. We at HealthMonics are presenting the 2022 final rule, and today is a special on the future of MVPs. Today presenting will be Saritha Curry, a MIPS specialist here, and myself, Michael Lewis. Hi, Saritha.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. We have a couple of housekeeping things. The first thing is that our questions, if you ask questions in the question box in the little GoToWebinar widget, we'll have the opportunity at the end of this presentation to discuss that. Otherwise, if you don't hear from us during the presentation, we will get back to you in a timely fashion after the webinar. Also on the bottom, you'll see handouts. Today, we just have the handout of the slide deck, so you can go ahead and keep that. At the end of the presentation this afternoon, I will be sending out to everybody on the call and those who had missed it, a copy of the presentation as well as the slide deck. And on top of that, it always will be available on our webpage at healthmonics.com. So today we will be covering a number of topics. We have the 2022 final rule highlights, CMS's objectives and structures of the MVPs. If you missed our previous webinar a couple of weeks ago, we went over the final rule in detail. This is specifically a webinar based upon the new program, the MVPs. HealthMonics insights on how MVP rollout will impact you, and what do you do today? So the agenda for this is participation. What are the participation options? The MVPs available for performance year 2023, that list will grow, but what are they available now? What are your reporting requirements, as well as what is a subgroup and how do they report? The performance category scoring and final score, as well as our HealthMonics reactions and insights onto the program. So I'm going to turn it over now to Saritha, who's going to discuss the first couple pages here.
Great, thank you, Mike. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is what MIPS value pathways is and what the purpose of it is. So as you may or may not already know from a review of both the proposed rule for 2022 and the final rule for 2022, MIPS value pathways is designed to be a streamlined reporting method that aligns the cost, quality, and improvement activities performance categories to report measures that are most appropriate for a given specialty. So this is, instead of having the 200 odd quality measures and 100 and so improvement activities available to all specialties to choose from, you would have a subset of measures for and activities for a specialty that is streamlined for that specialty. You would choose a smaller number of measures to report than is currently the requirements for traditional MIPS, and report only those measures. Promoting interoperability and administrative claims measures are also included. Promoting interoperability, it will be virtually unchanged. It is part of the quote foundational level. All participants have to report all measures. There's nothing that changed in the reporting requirements there. The aim of this is to do a couple of different things. One is to pave the way for alternative payment models. And the second is really to adopt subgroup reporting and make MIPS performance more representative of all clinician performance in a multi-specialty group. And we can go to the next slide. So here we'll see the current different proposed MIPS reporting frameworks, so, and the ways that you can participate in them. So we have traditional MIPS, the APM performance pathway, and MIPS value pathways. So currently, traditional MIPS and APP are both on the table. You can participate in these as groups, individuals, or APM entities or virtual groups. For MIPS value pathways, which the first available performance year will be 2023, we'll see a new entity, a subgroup, which we will talk about in more detail later. But basically, it is a similar range of participating entities as our traditional MIPS framework and the APP. Like this framework, CMS will award the highest score of the reporting entity as the MIPS final score. So for right now, for instance, if you report both as an individual or as a group, whether or not it's the individual or the group, the MPI-10 gets the highest submitted score to CMS, whether it's the individual or group. Nothing about that. Scoring process will change moving forward. In terms of participation options for MVPs, starting with 2023, in the next, and moving forward into 2026, nothing changes about who is able to participate, except for the addition of an additional participation type, that is the subgroup. So individual clinicians, single specialty groups, multi-specialty groups, APM entities, these can all choose to report MVPs. For now, multi-specialty groups can report as normal. It will be optional for them to also participate as a subgroup. However, beginning in 2026, the multi-specialty groups will have to form subgroups in order to report MVPs. This is just another look at that participation timeline. CMS is gradually phasing in MVP participation. So starting next year in 2023, the 7 MVPs that we will discuss a little bit later will all be available. During this time period from 2023 to 2025, all of these our traditional participation types will be able to submit MVPs with the addition of subgroups. And then starting in 2026, multi-specialty groups have to form subgroups in order to successfully report MVPs. What's not on this timeline is CMS has indicated that they anticipate sunsetting traditional MIPS in 2028, but that has not been finalized. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about subgroups. So the purpose behind subgroup reporting is, as I said earlier, to make all of the clinicians in a multi-specialty group performance count in MIPS reporting. So right now, for instance, if we have a large group that has internal medicine and radiologists and emergency physicians, for example, all of those clinicians are required to report on the same set of measures. So any eligible instances across any of those specialists all have to report on the same measures. When you form a subgroup, each clinician's specialty will report on its own set of measures. So in order to participate as a subgroup, a clinician must be a part of a clinical specialty This subgroup has to be basically self-nominated to CMS, and with they call it like a plain language name to identify the subgroup, and a certain set of NPI TINs will be identified with that subgroup. And then each subgroup is scored on all 4 performance categories. All right. So this is just recapping some of the things from our last slide. So our subgroup has to contain at least 1 MIPS eligible clinician. It's identified by the NPI TIN. For right now, clinicians reporting through MVPs or APPs as subgroups cannot be voluntary reporters or opt-ins or virtual groups. We'll see if this changes in the future, but basically only MIPS, sort of normal MIPS eligible clinicians are able to participate as subgroups. Now, most of our presentation is geared towards MIPS value pathways reporting. It is worth noting that subgroups are not limited to MIPS value pathways. APP can also be reported via subgroup. Subgroups are not a new idea from CMS. They've been sort of toying with how to incorporate this for large multi-specialty groups for the last few years, but this is the first time that it has made it into policy. Okay. So we've already talked about the timeline for participation. You can also talk about eligibility and special status determination. So subgroups will inherit the eligibility and special status determinations of the group. And again, as I said before, the TIN has to exceed the low volume threshold at the group level in order for the subgroups to be eligible. So no groups that are opt-in eligible or voluntary reporters will have subgroups that are eligible to participate. And they are not planning on doing any low volume threshold participation evaluation at a subgroup level.
Great, thanks, Sarita. So I'll take over on a couple slides here and throw it back to you. So when it comes to the MIPS, what is available for the program for MVP program year 2023? There are going to be 7 MVPs. You can read them here, but they are a lot of separate specialists. And I think that's the one key thing, is that specialties and disease states are what's going to take over for these MVPs and how they are split up. This list will be available obviously for you on the slide deck, as well as if you want to screenshot it, you can screenshot this screen. I'll leave it up there for a second. So an example of the MVPs, the MVP participants will select 4 quality measures. So we had a question on the chat that's asked, how does MVP differ from specialty set of quality measures? The big difference is that you only are going to need to choose 4 measures for 4 quality measures instead of the 6 you would with MIPS, as well as the other big difference is that they will have pre-selected improvement activities and cost measures that you must meet for each one of the MVPs. So one measure, just like in MIPS, needs to be a high priority, and if one's not, or an outcome measure, if a high priority or an outcome is not available, you can do high priority. And it can be one of the administrative claims measures. So if you have an outcome measure that is one of the administrative claims measures, you can choose that. You can see here, this is an example of the Advancing Rheumatology Patient Care MVP, and the normal measures that you'll see as a rheumatologist on here, including the very common 111 and 130 for the pneumonia and the current medications, which you'll see through multiple MVPs. MVP quality performance category scoring policies, so going over how they're going to be scored, will align with those used in traditional MIPS. So it's going to look very familiar. You know, we say in the question earlier about the specialty set is that this seems very similar to a specialty set with a few different caveats. So for changes for traditional MIPS were finalized, they're all going to also be for MVPs. As they change the measures, as they change some of the other scoring things, they will all match what you need for MIPS. So in 2022, the introduction of policy for scoring new measures without a benchmark, that is new for MIPS, so it is new for MVPs as well. That is going to make it so that you receive a 7-point scoring floor for new measures that don't have benchmarks, as well as 5 points for second-year measures would be the minimum that you're going to have. There are no bonus points for measures that meet end-to-end electronic reporting criteria. They got rid of that for this year in MIPS. Obviously, these programs are for 2023, but these are the rules that changed for 2022. There's no bonus points for reporting additional outcome and high priority measures. So before, we always recommended reporting an extra high priority outcome measures to receive those bonus points. That won't be available anymore. There is 0 achievement points for the quality performance category for any required measures that aren't reported. So you will get a 0 if you don't report any of the required measures, and that does include if you don't have a high priority or outcome measure. So when it comes to the quality performance category scoring and the changes for program year 2023, they will be removing, or they are planning on removing, the 3-point floor for quality measures. So before, if you scored a minimum, you were able to get, if you did poorly, you would be able to get 3 points as the floor, but that's no longer. It's going to go from 1 all the way to 10. Measures without benchmarks or that don't meet case minimum will earn 0 points. This including outcome-based administrative claim measures if available and selected by the MVP participant. Exemptions, currently small practices will continue to earn those 3 points for the measures under the traditional MIPS and MVPs. Small groups are those with 15 or less providers, and there are some different rules for each one of those groups across the board. Measures that can be scored against a benchmark will earn from 1 to 10 points. For improvement activities and cost, improvement activities, this is a little different than MIPS, as MVP participants will select 2 medium or 1 high weighted, no matter the size of their group. If the activity is available, the activity needs to be available as part of the MVP. For the cost performance category, this will limit the measures that you have to do for cost. So for cost, if you're attributed patients that fall under any of the cost categories under MIPS, you will be scored on that. For the MVP, it needs to be included in the MVP. So there may be things that you're attributed for that you are not going to be scored on because it's not within the MVP if you choose to be part of that. Scoring for both categories will match that of the traditional MIPS though. So we talked a little bit about the population health measures. So MVP participants will select at the time of the MVP registration 1 pop health measure to be calculated on. The results will be added to the quality score. There are 2 population health measures available for selection in 2023. There's the hospital 30-day all-cause measure, as well as the clinician and clinician group risk standardized hospital admission rate. So those are the 2 for chronic conditions. Those are the 2 measures that are available in 2023, but there will be more as they are trying to move more towards some of these population health measures in the future. Promoting interoperability performance category, so it's going to look very similar to MIPS. It's actually the same thing. MVP participants will report the same as under MIPS unless they are qualified for re-rating. So the same rules will apply for re-rating of promoting interoperability performance category, and that is determined based upon your clinician type, special status, or an approved PI hardship exemption application. Make sure you understand that that is an approved PI hardship exemption application, as those are becoming harder to come by. Subgroups will submit promoting interoperability data at the group level, not the subgroup level. The population health measure selected by the MVP participants, as I stated earlier, is in the quality performance category score. Similar to the policies for administrative claims measures and traditional MIPS, these measures will be excluded from scoring if the measure doesn't have a benchmark or you meet the case minimum for each of those. And for the quality measures, that's 20 patients. An exception, subgroups will receive the score of the pop health measure of their affiliated groups if applicable, in the event that the measure selected by the subgroup doesn't have a benchmark or meet the case minimum. Measures in the PI performance category will be scored in alignment exactly the same as MIPS. All right, I'm gonna throw it back over to Saritha for a couple of slides before I bring us on home. All right, Saritha.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about how the final score for MVPs is created. Luckily, this is fairly simple. The MVP scoring policies usually align with the same scoring policies in traditional MIPS. So the same category breakdown that per year applies to MVP scoring policies. So we can see in this particular case, we've got our 2021 MIPS performance category weights and our 2022 finalized MIPS reporting category weights. For 2021, as you well know by now, quality is at 40% and cost at 20%, with IA and PI remaining at 15 and 25% respectively. In 2022, we will see our final form of MIPS category scoring weights with quality and cost both at 30%. And this is what it should look like for traditional MIPS and for MVPs moving forward, with quality at 30%, cost at 30%, PI and IA as they have always been at 25 and 15%. It's also true that the sometimes complex reweighting policies, when a category does not apply to a particular clinician or clinician group score, the usual reweighting policies will still stand. The scoring hierarchy has also been updated to include subgroups, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, and the MIPS eligible clinician will receive the highest final score that can be attributed to their TIN MPI. It doesn't matter what the reporting option that they're using, whether that's traditional MIPS or APP or MVP, or the participation option, or whether they're individual group, subgroup, or APM entity. With the exception, of course, of virtual groups, the highest final score will be attributed to the TIN MPI.
I could hop in here. So what do you need to do today? Take the steps to prepare for MVP participation. So determine which of the 7 MVPs is right for your organization, or honestly, is an MVP worth looking at for you moving forward? Is that the direction that you want to go, or is traditional MIPS or some type of other APM model the way you want to move forward? Make sure your team is aware of the eligibility and the participation rules. We went over them in the beginning of the presentation, but there are a number of steps that you need to do to get to where you need to when it comes to the participation rules. Get the right tools in place. I know if you've been part of my presentations in the past, it is really important to understand what's available in your EHR, what measures you're able to report on, whether you need to utilize a registry like MIPSPRO, what your submission platform is, billing companies, consultants, telehealth program. There's a lot that you really need to look into as you are starting to think about the MVP participation. I will tell you now that if this is something that you're looking at, starting after a submission season this year, as soon as you submit your 2021 data, I'd start digging into what you can do and what measures it's going to take, learning how you could put the positions in place, because there will be some changes. And with only 4 measures that you need to report and can get graded on, you're going to have to make sure you're doing really well on those 4 measures. So a couple of things about our program and how we'll work with MVPs moving forward. MIPSPRO offers live dashboards and drill down capabilities. What we'll be able to do is we'll have a number of MVPs loaded in the system by 2023 with a lot of the measures that are needed, as well as we are working with some of the specialty organizations that we already are a part of to create future MVPs. As the program will expand, as it is 7 now, I would think that they'll add 10 plus more on for 2024 and as we move forward with each one of these MVPs. Our easy to navigate dashboard is designed strategically for administrators to understand, track, and drive performance. Being able to dive into your data, understand different cohorts of your patient bases, looking at just those diabetic patients, or being able to dig into your data by location, by provider, even by insurance that they have, gives you the ability really to take a look deep into your system and make the changes needed for performance improvement, and in turn, higher reimbursements, which if you were part of our final rule discussion last couple weeks ago, we shared that if there are, if COVID magically goes away this year, that in 2022, the reimbursement rates can be as high as 14% for those that are exceptional performers. This is a good time to get your questions in. I have a number of them I could get to, but if you have questions, feel free to ask them. And we won't really be on a full hour today. I'll give everybody some time back. So how MIPSPRO can help you report. Our best-in-class US-based support and integration teams are here to reduce your burden of quality reporting, allowing you to do what you do best, and that is treating your patients. Don't miss out on our December webinar series. Stay tuned for a list. We'll have 1 or 2 webinars in December as we head into submission season, and then we'll fully ramp up with more webinars starting in January. A couple of the questions that were asked here that I can get to as I leave it on this last slide here. We discussed, is there a current document that breaks down these measures? So currently the only document that has that is stuff that's done by the QPP. So I can get that document to anybody that needs it if I have it. Otherwise, we will be putting together more documentation around the MVPs in the new year. One question was, it seems that these are all clinical measures. How does this impact radiology, for instance, or other specialties? So right now they are created around the clinical categories. However, as more specialty organizations start to jump in on these measures and gaining MVPs, you'll start to see some of these MVPs that are really gaining more specific to that specialty. Kind of like you saw in the cost category this year, they added a dermatology measure to the cost category this year. And what that's allowing them to do is set up for the future of the MVP for dermatology and have that prepared so that they can do either like a melanoma MVP or a dermatology MVP and have that there.
So Mike, I'd like to jump in on that for a little bit. So
Great.
I think that's a good question because radiology is a specialty that oftentimes clinicians struggle to report 6 measures for. So we would actually look forward to seeing a radiology MVP with basically a lowered reporting requirement. So there's only 4 measures that are required to be reported for quality instead of 6. And if that happens, I think that actually helps specialties that right now either have fewer measures or they have highly topped out measures, or they have, in whatever way they find quality reporting difficult because of the current limited set of measures. We would hope that MVPs would actually help that score more accurately reflect their true clinician performance, and not just the fact that there's not a lot of good measures for a specific specialty. So although there's not a radiology MVP yet, we would anticipate CMS is looking forward to forming those for, say, like specialties that are currently underrepresented in MIPS measures.
Great, thank you, Sarita. And please feel free to hop in on any of these questions as I'm going through here. Here's a great question here. In the rheumatology example that we gave, I think it was slide 15, what happens if the group reports using the EMR and those measures are not developed as ECQMs? Do we have to utilize an alternative reporting mechanism? The answer is yes. If there are not 4 measures that you can report on, you will get a 0 for an MVP on a measure if you can't report on it. So utilizing a registry or doing some type of integration into a registry is your best option for that. Not all of these measures are ECQMs. A number of them are CQMs, which are registry measures. So joining MIPSPRO and doing it through MIPSPRO could be very beneficial for you.
So we did talk about how measures that are not reported will get a 0. Another way of saying that is there is no EMA process within MVPs. Because the MVPs are supposed to be developed for a specialty, it's anticipated that there would be enough measures for that specific specialty to report. And so there is no EMA process that reweights the quality denominator for reporting fewer measures.
Gotcha. Thank you. Man, you have a better way of saying things than me sometimes. So here's a great one. So as a small independent practice with one primary care provider, will primary care provider need to join a subgroup in order to report MVPs? Otherwise, can the PCP continue to report traditional MIPS? Why don't you go with that one, Sarita, since
Sure,
you're
I'm
rocking
happy
me with these questions.
So for a solo provider, they will not need to form a subgroup. So you can report MVPs without forming subgroups. The only participants that will be required to form subgroups in order to report are large multi-specialty groups, and that's not until 2026. So if you're a solo practitioner or you're a single specialty group, then you do not need to form subgroups. It's only when there are multi-specialty groups that you will have to form subgroups to report MVPs in 2026.
Gotcha. And on top of that, they had a question here on with a multi-specialty. If you're a multi-specialty group with, for this one was neurology and neurosurgery, are they able to report MVPs in 2023 or do they have to wait? I think we had.
I don't think that there are MVPs for those specialties, but let me check the list real quick.
Yeah, I was just looking back on the list. I don't think so. So if they're a multi-specialty group, the best option is going to be waiting until there are more multi-specialty measures to be able to break into subgroups.
Yeah, you will not be able to report MVPs until there is an appropriate MVP for your specialty. That is an interesting thing that we didn't delve into in the presentation. So CMS has already started with a call for additional MVPs, both for MIPS measures for CQMs or ECQMs, and actually for QCDR measures. So either a MIPS measure MVP might be appropriate, or even a perhaps a QCDR measure MVP would be appropriate for those specialties.
Great. Here's one. Will CMS designate groups for facility-based if appropriate? For example, if a group is composed of all hospitalists, will they still be designated as a facility-based, or will they have to use an MVP? No one's forcing anybody into having to use an MVP at this point. You know, they're saying that maybe MIPS will sunset, as Sarita said, in 2028, so you can still report through MIPS. Now, if there becomes a hospitalist MVP, which I highly think that will happen, then you can report the MVP measures through that, and they will be facility-based scoring will be taken out if you're going to take that as of now. But there was no facility-based scoring for 2021 reporting, so I don't know if they're phasing that out in the future.
Yeah, I think the no facility-based reporting for 2021 was a COVID impact problem. I don't think that they mentioned, I don't want to swear to that, but I don't think that that was mentioned in the final rule. It certainly wasn't mentioned in relationship to MVP. So I don't think any of the special status designations are changing as a result of MVPs.
Great. A couple more questions coming in. Everybody's asking great questions. Really appreciate that. What's the definition of a large multi-specialty group?
So that one, Mike, I could take that.
Yeah, please.
So I should say I may have misspoken when I said large multi-specialty group. I actually want to double check to make sure that's correct. So I think for subgroup reporting, it's for multi-specialty groups. If that's the case, it's just 2 or more. If it is a large multi-specialty group and I got that correct, then that would be 16 or more physicians. But let us check out the exact number for that. But the emphasis was more on multi-specialty group, and I may have invented the large part. So let's go back and check.
All right. How would the PI apply to MVP reporting? I can take that. It was put on one of the slides, but the PI will be done not at the subgroup. So if you're doing a subgroup, it won't be at the subgroup level. It would be at the group level PI, but otherwise PI would be done the same exact as MIPS. There are no changes to the PI except for if you're part of a subgroup, and that's the only difference. Otherwise, PI will be applied exactly the same with the same percentages as if you were in MIPS. So there are a couple more questions, but they are really specific to certain specialties and so forth. And we will have the opportunity to get back to you with those. But if there's no other questions, as I stated right in the beginning, this would be a quick call. Please feel free to reach out to me at the contact information that you see on this page if you have questions. Otherwise, I will get everybody a copy of this webinar as well as the slide deck moving forward. Everybody have a wonderful December, and if you need me, I will be around. Thank you. Thank you, Sarita, very much for doing this with us.
My pleasure. I am trying to grab that large multi-specialty subgroup definition.
Got it. Thanks, everybody.